Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 214 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we're going to plan for puffer breeding. Enjoy. And we have several things we can do with the puffers. We can do puffing number 1, where we put in a gas and we get out a different gas. Or a puffing type number 2, where with this one we put in gas and get out atmosphere, but with these other ones we put in wastewater and get a gas. Or the breeding. Well, in this case, we want to start with breeding because we don't want to use the puffers to the point to where there's not enough of them left to breed properly. So the very first step is breeding. And by running that process, it will start creating the extra egg types, which will then come through here. And then we will get all 5 types. So let's see if we can figure out what kind of setup we would need to get these inputs. 1.72. Let's start again, and it's a little complicated because we get random amounts of each one. But at least this time, the crafting time is the same, so we will get the same amount of each. So we click, come back out here, and click again. Do this 5 times. We want some speed modules, and let's do like 100 and see what happens. So we'll do 100 there. Because this is all just random chance, so on average we'll get the correct amount. But not always, so even if this is perfectly calculated, we still won't necessarily have a balanced setup just based on how the odds happened. But, alright, let's see, that should all be good, and then what does it give us? Well, you see that the birth rates aren't exactly even, that we do get slightly more rancid puffers than the other types. So we want to modify this so we get 1.72 of eggs. So since gaseous puffer and rancid puffer produce more than the other ones, let's walk these others back first. So we want 1.72. Let's maybe get them to 80. It's pretty close. Let's do 90 for now. Okay, so it's a little high, but now we need to walk back gaseous. Let's say like 60 and 60. See what that looks like. Well, it's actually pretty good now. It's not quite perfect, but I almost don't want to touch it now. Because I don't know how that happened, where all the numbers just kind of worked out, or it's a 2 to 3 ratio here, where it's 60 60 and then 90 90 90. So maybe that's the takeaway here. So I need to cut 3 out at a time, but then that would make an odd number of machines. But also this is Factorio and we do things perfect. At least we tried to. So we'll cut 3 out of each machine here. And then 2 out of each machine here. And that's too little. So I guess we're going with this. 60 60, 90 90 90. Well, that worked. Easier than I was expecting. And then we have to look at inputs here, where we've got to supply the atmosphere, the foods, and the pulp. Well, let's cover what we already do and see if we can do it. So can we do 175 nutrient pulp? Well, this setup right here, if it ran at full blast, surprisingly enough, could only barely do it. But it could. And we'd be pulling leaves away from here as well. And we would need 6.76, and this would make way more than that. So plenty of leaves. Let's check our other source of nutrient pulp, this byproduct. And it's actually 180, assuming that it ran at full power. And looks like it very much could. So nutrient pulp probably won't be a problem as long as we pull it from here. And this definitely produces a huge amount of resources, so that's not a problem there. And then we would get 108 beans when we needed that same 6.76. So all of that's fine. we would just need to do the nuts, pips, and fruits. But looking at the size of these farms, it would probably be reasonably small. And then we need to make the atmosphere. And this is kind of tricky because we want this setup to be as self-sufficient as possible. So you see that certain types of puffing will produce atmosphere as opposed to consume it. Basically this one. But also, we need to assume that all of these are going to run at the same time, which means we're going to need way more atmosphere than just for this setup. But to calculate it all now might be too difficult. And also, to calculate it for this whole setup, all 3 or 4 tiers of machines, might be too difficult. So instead, perhaps we should just have the machines, so the atmosphere machines, making the atmosphere locally to each setup, but then have them connected to a greater pipe system so they can share resources if they have a surplus of them. So we need to figure out how this atmosphere works, because the numbers are very similar as far as acid gas to atmosphere, so it might be a 1-to-1 ratio here where we don't actually have to put anything in other than how the process runs itself. So our input is puffer atmosphere, and we could make it through these puffing or the atmosphere itself, but we'll leave that for later because we need to set up the logic properly. And that's a lot of machines just for this, which is my worry. But we have modules, which always help. But that requires sulfur dioxide gas, hydrogen fluoride, and oxygen. Let's back out for a second. And we'll also process the acid gas that needs a green metal catalyst to turn it back into its components. So we'll hit that. And looks like only one speed module will help here. So we create that, and then we come back here to figure out what we ultimately have. And it is not a perfect ratio. Let's see, although I think it's set on input here. There we go. I think this would work better. Is that going to cover them all? Because we want to make sure we don't have any extras. Looks like it. And there's so many resources to follow here, so this isn't particularly a dense graph. But we need the 175 puffer atmosphere, so we would use sulfur dioxide gas, hydrogen fluoride, and oxygen. Meanwhile, after the breeding, they will create acid gas, and then that acid gas is broken down into fluoride, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen sulfide. The carbon dioxide is not used, at least for this process, so it is stored. Meanwhile, we need some amount of sulfur dioxide gas. So in other words, we would need oxygen and sulfur to make this a balanced input. And then it would create an excess of hydrogen sulfide on the back end, as well as hydrogen fluoride. But also, we can potentially convert this hydrogen sulfide into something that can be useful. So perhaps we could make that number go down a bit. So let's hit this hydrogen sulfide here, which when you add oxygen, it turns into sulfur again. And then we'll grab that sulfur and turn it into sulfur dioxide gas. We'll worry about these numbers in a bit. We just want to see what we're working with here. So this is interesting, that the process will require oxygen, but then on the back end, we will basically create acid components. We're creating sulfur, and we're creating hydrogen fluoride. But we don't want to ship sulfur dioxide gas. We want to leave it in sulfur form. So we're going to back out of here. Let's add some speed modules, so we only need the one machine. And I'm happy that these numbers are getting fairly small. This isn't, unfortunately, but the rest of this is. But you can kind of see how not having to go through this effort of making this puffer atmosphere would be especially useful if we use this process here instead of dealing with all that acid gas. So there are certainly advantages to doing it in different ways. But we don't want to be shipping gases if possible. So we'll stop at the sulfur stage and then come back. And then we require the input of sulfur dioxide gas, which we will do outside here. So it will use that sulfur. Speed modules are not necessary because we already need less than one machine. So there we go. There's our oxygen input, and then our sulfur output, and then the hydrogen fluoride. Could we process that? Well, we could add purified water and make it hydrofluoric acid, which is denser. You see it goes from 90 to 60. So that would be a denser way of handling it. It also goes into more puffer atmosphere. So I don't know if I want to do that yet, because what I'm considering is how are we going to get rid of stuff that is too much? And sulfur is a very dense way of getting rid of it because we can just put that on a drone. But gases, even 5 gas per second is kind of high for drones. So we don't necessarily want to do that. The carbon dioxide is also kind of a problem. You can see how we have all these different options, like we could turn it into urea with ammonia that we make from other processes. So you can see how like a lot of this stuff is very interconnected. So we don't necessarily want to think of it as, okay, we have this gas, so we're going to send this gas back to acid processing. Okay, we have this carbon dioxide, let's send it back to the coal processing. Because when this whole setup is built, we want all these processes to be interconnected, and then we'll find out what we have too much of, basically by just letting the thing run. But I know that sending sulfur back in this form is efficient, so I'm fine with leaving it this way. As far as these other gases, I think we should basically hold on to them. Carbon dioxide is not very valuable, so we can just dump it. And honestly, we can dump the hydrogen fluoride too. But we could also just place some storage tanks, or potentially a bunch of them, and just see how the process runs. And then later on, we'll figure out what we want to do with that. And, you know, each one of these processes is going to have its own set of chemical machines next door handling everything. Because we don't know what process is going to run, so we kind of have to assume that all of them are. Alright, we need to make some oxygen here. And I think I'll just do the air separation as a simpler way of not having to deal with electrodes and all of that, and slag and water and all that. So we'll just go down this chain right here. Get that taken care of. And we have some nitrogen gas which would be dumped. And the catalyst would be easy enough to set up. And then we would need to bring in the different foods. But we can plan that after we have the rest of this all built. So it's 60, 60, and 90. So if we potentially build 30, we can just copy them all the number of times necessary. But let's see what it looks like. Let's start out with the breeding here. We've got various inputs and outputs. So on one end, food and puffers will go in. Let's just do it like right here. And then on this side, we can also do the output, which would just be whatever we get. It doesn't have to be sorted because we don't know what we're going to get as the output, and that's fine. I assume these machines run so slowly that inserter type does not matter in the slightest. So we'd have this going up and down the chain. One pulling in and one going out. We'd also need a power pole, which if we put one of these on the other side, it might work because we can kind of do this. Kind of like that. So that ought to work. Then we need to stitch all these together. It's kind of interesting that the connection is here, but there's no, like, graphic for that. Also, it's kind of annoying that these shift a little bit, so it wouldn't quite work like that. That if we wanted these to be lined up, it would more have to be like this. See, I think we're approaching something that can be tiled. Let's see about this. It's kind of a pain and kind of not straight. But do we have something that can tile? I think so. So we got to think of the shape we're going to want this. Probably want these to be fairly long, since there's going to be 5 of them in a row. So 16, 32, and it looks like a reasonable length right here. And then again, let's keep the power poles going. Robot parking spots. We need to charge up again, so let's just plop something in here. Let's see, sun's coming up and how is power? Looks like we're holding out now with the new upgrades. So, what does that look like on pipe visualizer? There's some kind of extra pipe business on the end there, but I think we're good. Once everything's built, we can get rid of any extra pipes that are sitting around. So what do we have here? 64. Well, we can build that and then figure out what we need to do from there. So we would just copy that a bunch of times and modify. So we've got those setups complete. Now we need to do things like processing the gases. And this gas setup will be for all 5 groups here. So we can just build it somewhere and then figure out where it needs to go. Our advanced chemical plants in here. It doesn't look like it. We had a crash there. So we might as well put chemical plants in there. I guess we'll do the normal plants, the electrolyzers, liquefiers, air filters. Let's add that onto the end. Making electrolyzer number 1, electrolyzer number 2, and number 3. And hopefully it's set for the big number on the end. And then we can do another triple. For the liquefiers. And then we need to do a double for air filters and chemical plants. Put these in here. And then from there, I think we just need a single doing the advanced chemical plant. So advanced, and yeah, 200, sure. I was thinking we were just going to make a couple different types of machines there, but now it looks like we're making every single thing the factory needs, or at least all the production machines. Because we just don't need them in enormous quantities, at least compared to other things. Let's see, do we have any in here already? Probably. Electrolyzers, chemical plants, liquefiers, air filters. Looks like we're just about cleared out of everything here. We're kind of just stuck with the ore sorting and processing stages now, and some other random stuff, but getting pretty close to making everything. Let's see, all of the various bits should get in here. I would expect most of these chests to have some resources in them. But we can get started on these. Anything that does have resources in the chest must mean that it's set up properly. Yeah, I definitely think we need more accumulators because even with everything going, it doesn't quite get charged by the time the sun goes down. But I don't know if I want to build a bunch of new accumulators if, after we're done with this, we can make the lithium batteries and then be able to make better batteries, because right now the accumulators are taking up a fairly reasonable chunk of our base. I mean, I know it's much larger than that, but still, I don't want to like double this up, because we'd essentially make twice as much of this, so it would be, all of this would be filled up by accumulators, or we'd have to pick a new spot somewhere to put them. So I kind of don't want to right now. Okay, that seems to be working pretty good. Let's grab some chemical plants for now. We need 33 of them. If possible, it would be nice to get the middle to be lined up. So I think if we did something like this, and let's see what it would look like. Pipes probably aren't going to be in the right spots. Unfortunately, no. Because we have 3 inputs, they would have to do a whole bunch of zigzags, probably making it not worth it. Something like that, and we'd need a bunch of them, but they probably would fit pretty well just by going straight down. Pipe visualizer looks pretty good. So you'd want to have some power in here. It looks like a single power pole in the corner will work. So what is that? 28. It is longer than this, but this is the shorter version that most of them are going to be 50% longer than that, so this should work okay. That's 32. We technically need 32.5. So we'll just put one more in there. Pipe visualizer still looks good. And that should be our 34. Yep. Of course, need to put modules in there. And same over here. Let's use the module inserter for this. Speed and speed. Did it work? Can't tell. It like goes over it, but I guess the key thing is our robot's on the way. Not really. That will get us our puffer atmosphere. To actually start this process, we're going to have to put some resources into it, but that's fine. We will take care of that when it's all built. These other setups, like dealing with the sulfur dioxide gas, and the oxygen, are all rather small numbers of machines, so I don't think we really need to prepare that ahead of time. I do kind of want to grab just a couple of machines, just to make sure we're prepared when we do want to start building stuff. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, we're going to build the setup. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.